It was okay just before, but it just, well, let me just stop this slide. Sorry about that.
Do you want me to play it for you? Just send it from email or chat box. That would be fine.
Okay. Let me send you.
Email? Okay.
Yeah.
While we wait, I'd like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to also open the link to Professor Kiyong's latest blog post, which is about the result of the elections. It's really comprehensive, and it's very useful for us to start the conversation from reading the article. And also an interesting starting point for us to learn about the dynamics in South Korea before and right just after the election. Okay.
Ella, I just sent it to you.
All right. Awesome.
I hope it's okay. It happens all the time.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry.
And I think because of the computer,
Mm.
the capacity problem. So let me just
Mm-mm-mm.
start without slides.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
Thank you very much.
No
And
worries.
sorry
No
about
worries.
this delay. Well, good morning, everyone, again. Thank you for coming to this webinar in early morning in Indonesia. I think it's 9 p.m. Okay, this is my great honor, truly, to today to have an opportunity to meet everyone here, Your Excellency, Ms. Ambassador, and Indonesian scholars and activists and politicians. And I would like to extend my special thanks to Ella, to you, Professor Ella Pripatini, if I pronounced okay. So my title today is about gender and generation in South Korean presidential election. Well, the election is truly the everything about South Korea, but my talk particularly focused on gender and generation. And this talk today is completely based on my blog post, which Ella just shared with you. So if you read it, and this is about my talk today. I would love to talk more about the details in Q&A session if we have time and if you have questions. So 9 months, on 9th March, the Yoon Suk-yeol of the opposition party, the party is called People Power Party. The Conservative Party had changed their name several times. It's so hard to follow, but now I will call it PPP for the rest of my talk. He was elected as next president of South Korea in the closest election. The election was the closest since South Korea returned to democracy in 1987. And Yoon was a complete political novice, but he rose to be the presidential nominee of the PPP in only several months after his resignation from the post of a prosecutor general in last January. Immediately, he became very popular because he had this image of a principled prosecutor who was against political power during all his tenure. For example, he investigated a very difficult political scandals under the Park Geun-hye government. If any of you remembers who Park Geun-hye is, she is the first female president in South Korea and first female president in East Asian region, actually. And he became, but he investigated all the political scandals, and because of that, he was relegated to a much lower position in outside of Seoul area. So he became a symbol of change in existing politics, particularly to those who are very disillusioned with the ruling party. There has been a consistent high support in Korea for a change of government in election. And Yoon Suk-yeol became a new alternative to those people who want change of government in this election. So Yoon's victory did not come as any surprise to us because we expected him to win in the election. But what was surprising instead was a very small margin of victory. The margin was only 247.99 votes. That means that he won less than 50% of the votes. This narrowly won election means that half of the South Korean people did not actually support Yoon. And the national division, half of the people support for ruling party and the rest of the people, the last half of the people support for opposition party. It created a critical problem in South Korean politics. And that division has become even more evident in this election. Throughout the election period, there were various scandals and mudslingings and all those things, criticism, and those things were rife. And the people were so disillusioned and people were very divided. The election, in my view, was not about a clear policy competition or the vision for the future, but it was about the division. The driving force was mobilization of votes between the camps for and against the regime change, completely determined the outcome of the election. So as a result, how to unify the deeply divided people is now the biggest challenge for new government. However, the national unity does not seem so easy to me. For a long time, the important political cleavages in South Korea has been conservative and progressive ideology and regional sentiment between East and West area of the nation. So the East has been traditionally very conservative and support for conservative party, and which tend to be a ruling party for a long time. And West of South Korea tend to be progressive, politically progressive, and they have supported for progressive party. The current ruling party under the Moon Jae-in government is progressive. It's called Progressive Party, and they got support from the western area of the western region of South Korea. So in recent elections, not only these traditional cleavages of ideology and regional sentiment, generation and gender gaps have become very significant and actually emerged as significant as traditional cleavages. And this phenomenon was clearly revealed in this presidential election. Now, one of the reasons behind this is that the PPP used gender division as an election strategy. To be more precise, the PPP Conservative Party capitalized on the anti-feminist, anti-women sentiments of young men in their 20s and 30s. The party used this sentiment as a strategy to win the support for Yoon Suk-yeol this time. For example, Yoon has a lot of pledges, election pledges. The Yoon's youth pledge included abolition of the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. And now the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family has supervised the gender mainstreaming in national government's policies and a lot of not only women's policies, but also family policies. But Yoon pledged he would abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. And also, he pledged to strengthen the punishment for false accusation of sexual violence and crimes. And these policies were appealed to young men who were actually opposed to the gender equality policy of the current government. In fact, the younger generation under the age of 50 had been far from supporters for the conservative parties, like the PPP or the forerunners to PPT in South Korea. The young generation was a traditional support for progressive parties. So the conservative parties have won overwhelming support from voters in their 50s and the elder generation. So the expanding their support to the young generation has been a daunting challenge for the conservative parties. The current party leader, Lee Jun-suk, came exactly to this point. At the time he was elected a party leader, it was last June, and he was only 36 years old. And that is the youngest party leader of the major political party in South Korea. And he was welcomed by party as a talent who would attract the support of the youth to the PPP. The problem is that the party under Lee Jun-suk's leadership used the anger and woes of the young people, such as rising house prices. So under the Moon government, the biggest policy failure was the house price. And young people are so frustrated because they don't dream to buy or own their own house because the house price is so high. So that's one biggest the policy failure under Moon government, and the lack of good jobs. And it's not just the problem of the Moon government. It has been, the job quality has been lowered, and there's now more competition for young people who are highly educated, but there are not many good quality jobs for them. So this is again frustrated young people. And there's a male-only conscription system in Korea. The security problem is such a big problem. And only young men are conscripted to the military. And this is another very big frustration for young generation of men. And so those anger and words of the young people were used as an easy way to appeal to these group of people in their 20s and 30s. But the PPP, the Conservative Party, did not actually propose policies to fundamentally improve their reality. So the young generation was very frustrated in the end by the hypocrisy of the older generation, particularly the Progressive Party, because they are the ones who speak a lot about justice and fairness, but young people think that they just say with only words, right? But instead they are more interested in protecting their own interests. And Lee Jun-suk, the young party leader, garnered support by sprouting statements and policies that sympathized with those young men's position. In this process, the gender equality policies were dismissed as a reverse discrimination policy against men. And this is it's not only a South Korean problem, but everywhere in the world. But that sentiment became very big in recent days. And because of that, the voices of women were relatively ignored. But young women who were awakened by the Me Too movement have strongly raised the issue of deep-rooted gender discrimination in South Korean society from their own point of view. Yet, Yoon Suk-yeol revealed a serious lack of knowledge about all these problems. And he has been making a problematic comment such as, there is no longer structural gender discrimination in South Korea anymore, or the gender responsive budget should be reduced and used for national defense instead. These comments are either completely false or based on the lack of any knowledge about gender issues. In addition, the ruling party, the current ruling party, thought that they might lose a significant part of their traditional support base. So they also tried to ride on a bandwagon of gender backlash. So this made young women feel we are politically homeless with no political party to support. So that was very clear at the poll that was taken in the last week of February, which was only 2 weeks before the presidential election. The poll shows more than 40% of women in their 20s and 30s, young women, actually did not decide who to vote for by that time. So it was like the biggest group of people who have not decided their mind yet. So as the election races proceeds in a close match toward the end of the campaign, Lee Jae-myung of the ruling party, and he came to this point and then belatedly began to appeal to young women by recruiting a young women activist into his campaign camp who was working against the digital sex crimes. And she's very she's the influencer among young women in South Korea. And the recruitment of her and then her speech and her speech for support for Lee Jae-myung was actually very efficient in the last minute to attract young women's votes for Lee Jae-myung. So the upshot was the polarizing voting result according to the gender of the youth shown in the graph. Can you show the graph, Ella? The next slide, thank you.
This one, yeah?
Yes. So if you see the active poll, and it's quite, it is really polarizing, particularly in young people in their 20s. 58% of women in their 20s voted for Lee Jae-myung. And the same 58.7 point of men in their 20s voted for Yoon Suk-yeol. The first two parts of the graph. Although there are a lot of different interpretations about this election result, the voting pattern of young women marks a significant event in that they clearly expressed their collective political will in the election. In total, women under the age of 50 have had a higher voter turnout than men in the same age group. For example, in the 19th presidential election, the previous presidential election, the turnout of women aged 19 to 49 was more than 5% higher than that of men. And there's a modern gender gap appears in South Korea too, which means women vote more. Like the voting rate, turnout rate of women are higher than men. And also women voted more for progressive parties than the conservative parties. So these two gaps also emerged in South Korea. Young women have supported center-left or progressive parties much more than men and any other generation. And nevertheless, the voices of men in their 20s and 30s are overrepresented in politics, as I just described, while those of young women's voices has been scarcely heard in political world. And young women don't have their representatives in politics either. The rate of women MPs in general in National Assembly in Korea is only 19%, although the regional assembly women comprises 30%, close to 30%, but at national politics only 9%. And among those 9%, young women are even lower. So the political structure that has excluded women and the persistent misogyny, which does not recognize women as independent political actors, have made women completely invisible and unheard. But such politics based on division and aversion and critique and mudslinging led to a drastic fall in voter turnout in younger generation, among others. So the voting rate fell the most among those in their 20s and younger. For example, it was 76.2 points in the previous presidential election 5 years ago, but this time the voting rate is 65.3%. I'm not sure how high it is in Indonesia, but usually for presidential election, the voting rate is really high. But this time, the voting rate, particularly in the younger generation, drastically fell by 10%. And those voter turnout, fall of the voter turnout is particularly it was particularly significant for men in their 20s, because these group of the young men in their 20s did not vote, did not participate in did not participate much in the election, particularly this time. But according to the Gallup poll taken a week after the election, just last week, what people wanted the most from the new government was national unity. So the president-elect has a big challenge, but he did not put forth any concrete plan for this so far. Instead, Yoon reconfirmed that his pledge that he would definitely abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. So he recklessly claimed, in my view, that the ministry has fulfilled its historical role, although all the other index like Global Gender Gap Index of South Korea and Glass Ceiling Index actually indicates the reality is far from gender equality. Again, his own Presidential Transition Committee, there were only 4 women appointed out of 24 members. So the women comprises only 16.6%. So we don't believe him that there is no structural gender inequality in South Korea, or the Ministry of Gender Equality has fulfilled historical role and we don't need any more. So it is not clear how the new government will win the cooperation of how larger opposition party and young people, therefore, when Yoon and the PPT seems to be obsessed with the policies that promote division rather than unifying people. So this is my description of the gender and generation politics in this election. So does that mean that South Korea will return to the old boys network type of politics? And I hope not, but for better or worse, gender and generation issues will continue to play an important role in the coming election and Korean politics for, I think, for a while. And I'm concerned that politics that relied on the old boys network, which we now see, could further deepen the political exclusion of women and youth and their lack of political representation. I believe unless women and minorities' voices are heard and represented, neither a truly unified society nor an exclusive and full-fledged democracy would be possible. Thank you very much. This is a short talk, but
Thank you.
Your questions.
Thank you so much. Let's give a warm applause if you can. Please open your mic. Yay! Somebody just told me open the mask because it's not really clear for them to see. So I can just open. It's a closed room, so it's okay. So it's fine. Thank you so much for the talk and the insight is very important and timely. I understand that we also be joined by the chairperson of the National Commission on Violence Against Women in Indonesia. Welcome, Ibu Andi. And thank you so much for the opening session for us to discuss further in a Q&A. So please prepare your questions. I know you have so many questions. Again, K-pop, K-drama does not always represent Korea. So it's always interesting to see the stats, understand the behavior, political behavior and communication in Korea. So we are now next on the next agenda, which is we'll be listening deliberation from Perludem. So Perludem is one of the prominent NGO, Professor Kyung, in Indonesia in terms of elections. And without further ado, I would like to invite the chairperson, executive director of Perludem, Ibu Khoirunnisa Agustyati, to start her speech for us. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Ella. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, excellent.
Okay. Let me share my screen.
Yes.
Just let me know, Mbak Ella, if I already access 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, it's the wrong presentation. I'm sorry. Okay, wait. Here we go. Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the time for today's discussion. Actually, it is a collaboration between Perludem and Association of International Relation. International Relation, Mbak Ella. So we talk about South Korea presidential election, and then we decide why don't we have lesson learned discussion about South Korea presidential election. And actually Indonesia learned a lot from South Korea's parliamentary election in 2020 because at that time South Korea is maybe a few of country that held election due to pandemic situation. So we learned a lot how South Korea managed the election. And now South Korea just have presidential election. And from what I heard from Professor Kyung explanation and read from the article from the media, that what happened in South Korea presidential election, actually, a little bit the same with the situation in Indonesia, where the polarization have impact in our election. So I will talk more about how populism and polarization related to the election. If we are talking about the populism, actually it is a global trend. In 2019, the Economist Intelligence Unit and the Global State of Democracy, the International idea, released a democracy index. In general, these two institutions said that there was a declining in the value of democracy globally. One of which is the influence of populism. And the declining of democracy occurred in the rise of politician and populist movement, especially in Europe, America, Asia, and the Pacific. Indonesia is also impacted by this issue. And it is exploiting the citizens' discontent because the populists take advantages of citizen dissatisfaction due to the rising of inequality. Whether it is perceived or actual, for example, corruption, mass migration, unemployment, and increasing of digitization and its impact on the labor structure. So from what I heard from the Professor Kyung explanation, that maybe in the South Korea situation, there is some group of voters that feel inequality. So, and it is used by the political actor to get more votes from the voters. And talking about the populism, the polarization, it is very harmful to our democracy because it attacks people's emotion. Polarization in society occurs by bringing up issues that close to people's emotion. In Indonesia context, for example, use religion or ethnicity, or other identity that close with our emotion, close to our identity. And it is a very critical issue for democracy because the emergence of polarization can threaten democracy because it can reduce democratic values. Democratic values can be compromised for the interests of a populist group. It is more harmful when the government that elected by the polarization situation see that other groups that the opposition as an enemy. So yeah, like if we have enemy, then they have to be, enemy should be defeated. And sometimes they use violence to attack the oppositions. In Indonesia context, for example, because a very polarized election, our last election is in 2019 election, and oops, there is some, okay, I just stopped my screen ya, Mbak Ella. Okay. Okay, because there is a hacker, I guess. So I just stop my screen and I will continue the presentation. Talking about the polarization, it is also becoming a commodity in election because the populism becomes a commodity in elections. Not infrequently, this issue is used before the election to get most votes from voters. And talking about the populism that effect to the polarization of in the society, we can see that actually there are two sides of populism. First, we need to the first side is we need to be observant to see the signal in the narrative of populism. Populism reminds the elite of the weakness of representative democracy. Democracy also needs a critic because sometimes the government who are elected from the majority votes, sometimes they are forget about the minority, and sometimes the minority feels that they are not represented enough with the government. So that is why populism reminds the elite of the weakness of the representative democracy. And it is also a sign of non-functioning of one of several organs in the political system. The representation of the people is not going well, and also it is the mirror of democracy, so that the elites do not forget to absorb as much as possible the interests of the people. But in the other side, populism can be a pathology of democracy because it tends to take advantage of momentary electoral emotions. It can be exclusive, intolerant, racist, and delegitimizes the processes not in their interest. And also it can make electoral democracy regress. And talking about identity, politics, and voting behavior connected with the sociological variable that we are living, that people's live are influenced by the character of identity, which can also influence political choices, for example, economic status, religion, place of residence, occupation, age, and ethnicity. And there are three components of sociological voter behaviors. The first is there are sociological characteristics of the society, for example, education, work, social networks, social class, and then religions. Voters have a potential to choose parties or candidates that have the same religious program as the characteristic of the voters. And also race, ethnicity, regionalism, that voters also tend to support candidates who fight for race and ethnicity, who fight for this issue. And it become the commodity on the election, use the identity. Talking about compared with Indonesia election, for example, actually the polarization already happened in 2014 election. At that time, the polarization is also happen when there is when social media is also one of factor that polarize the society. At 2014 election, for example, the issue of hoax, disinformation that raise identity politics, for example, is aimed to change people's opinion, people's preference in the election. For example, if I already prefer to vote for candidate A, but because there is a hoax, for example, disinformation, then I can change my preference to the candidate B. And the role of social media is also very strong in Indonesian context. And at the one side, if we talk about social media, it is free. The public can easily install social media applications without having to pay any rupiah, for example. It is easy that social media is easy to access anywhere and can be through a variety of devices. It is also fast, that information can be received and disseminated quickly. And it is also empowering that we can give any comments on anything, and we can discuss on anything, can be held with anyone at any time. That's the positive side of social media. But there is also the risk of social media that impact to the polarization of the society. Hoax, disinformation, false news, information disruption is used as voter suppression. We have research on voter suppression in Indonesia, and one form of the voter suppression is about the information disruption, that it can impact to the voters, it can polarize the society. And the second is the use of false account or anonymous to mislead the people. Yeah, the opinion is they are trying to change the opinion, to mislead the information about the voters. And it is done systematically and coordinated. There is also a coordinated black campaign, for example. And other risk of the social media is it is not accountable, non-transparency campaign finance, especially campaign spending in social media. So what happened in South Korea presidential election, I assume that it is maybe it is also a global trend. The International IDEA in 2019 said that there is a decreasing of democracy, and one factor that decreased democracy is about gender parity. In around the world, I think there are so many countries already have a policy to increase women participation in politics, but the progress is very slow. So the International IDEA said that if there is no progressive policy, then we still need more than 40 years to get gender parity in the politics. So it is a challenge for us, to make sure that the election not to be not to as a tools to polarize the society, because the impact, because it is very harmful. In the context of Indonesia, for example, we have our last election is in 2019, but the polarization is still happen until now. And 2 years from now, we will have election in 2024. We should learn a lot from other countries, for example, from Indonesia, how to make sure that election not become a tools to polarize the society, so that the government elected from the election can make sure the unity of the countries. I think I will stop here, Mbak Ella. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry that I have to stop my presentation because there was a...
Yes, yeah. I do apologize for that one too. I was trying to find who's the culprit, but we'll see. There we come up. Thank you so much for the presentation. The reason why we're very strict with the time allocation is because we want to have more questions from the floor, and we would like to hear feedbacks and answers from Professor Keong as well, and from other speakers in this event. Thank you so much for the elaboration on Indonesian experience as well. Now, that brings me to the last speaker for today. Okay, and then we will have, apologies, I forgot to read the short bio, apologies. Let me do that. Okay, so our Executive Director of Perludem, Ibu Khoirunnisa Nur Agustyati, since 2010 has been working on electoral issues in Indonesia and around the globe after graduating from the University of Indonesia. She joined CETRO, the Center for Electoral Reform, and in 2012 she was actively working as an election researcher for Perludem, and in 2017 she was appointed as the Deputy Director of Perludem and now serving as the Executive Director of Perludem. She already published her works, and she also conducted seminars and workshops, and I think it's very relevant to Professor Keong's works as well. I hope this will be a good start for you, for the two of you to collaborate in the future. And then next, let me read the short bio for Ms. Annisa Pratamasari, Master of Science. She is currently a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of International Studies, Korea University. She is also a full-time lecturer at University of Airlangga in Surabaya. She is a junior lecturer in the Department of International Relations and currently studying for a doctoral degree in International Studies in Korea University, majoring International Commerce. She obtained her bachelor degree from the university. She's currently working as a lecturer, and Master of Science from Chinese Culture University in Taipei, majoring International Trade. She has a huge interest in international political economy, culture, trade, Hallyu, and inter-Korean relationship. So without further ado, let me invite Ms. Annisa Pratamasari to share her experience being an Indonesian in Korea during the election. Thank you. Let's allow that for 10 minutes, and then after that we will start our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ella and AIHII for the opportunity. So I will just share like a short kind of like speech about my own experience of like election being Indonesian in Korea and as a foreigner. So this is a purely foreigner's perspective, because most of we cannot vote for presidential election, and if I'm not mistaken, only permanent residents or the holder of like spouse visa can vote in the like legislative or like smaller kind of election, but not presidential. So in here, people were asking, like, why should we care about this? Why it impact us? Because we cannot even vote for this election, and we don't even have a voice. But for me, it will this kind of election, especially like presidential election, will have a great impact for us who's living in Korea as a foreigner. Like, the first issue for me is like the real estate, which is also a huge issue in Korea, like for Koreans themselves, because this is real estate is one of the most determining choices for like voters to cast their vote, because the house prices keep rising. People cannot buy houses, like what Professor Keong already said. So that's why Yoon Suk-yeol won, because he promised like things that he will reduce the house pricing and stuff. And also the voters felt disappointed with Moon Jae-in administration, so they just decided to vote against Moon Jae-in's party instead of like looking at the actual policies of the candidates. For foreigners, it will we cannot obviously we can't buy a house in Korea, but we are renting the rooms here. And I, as a foreigner who has been living in Korea for like 4 years, I felt that the rent has been going up for like maybe doubled or like at least like several thousand won, and the deposit rate is getting higher and higher per year. I myself like living in a like Koshiwon, which is like small space for students, so I don't have to pay for deposit. But if you rent in a like small room, they call it one room here, you have to pay at least 10 million won to get a decent room, which like speak about like bigger than the most. The thing is, as a student, it's impossible for you to pay 10 million won, which is equivalent to almost 100 million rupiah. In Indonesia, you can buy a house with that amount of money. and that's only for 1 year deposit. So yeah, if the real estate price continue to raise, we may not be able to rent a room in Korea as a foreigner. And the second issue is about national health insurance. When I first arrived in Korea, it was not mandatory for everyone to have national health insurance. At that time, I was only enrolled in my university insurance with additional insurance if you want to have it, but we are not required to have the national health insurance from Korean government. Since 2020, suddenly we are required to have it. It's not even required, it's like we are registered to it automatically without having a choice. The problem was the amount that we have to pay per month was around like 130,000 won, which is like almost equivalent to 1 million rupiah per month. And most of us are living in the scholarship around like 500,000 or like 1 million won per month. So you can see that the amount that we have to pay if we pay full will be very high, and it won't be enough for us to keep the living expenses per month. So the government decided to reduce the amount of the insurance premium that we have to pay as a student. So currently I have to pay for like 60,000 won per month, which is almost like 700,000 rupiah per month. That's already reduced rate. That's for student. They keep increasing it per year actually, because the first time I only pay like 40,000. Now I have to pay like 60,000. And the government or the school never give explanation why the rate is raising and how we can claim the insurance, for example, what can cover us if we go to the hospital. So foreigners, mostly students, we don't know how to utilize the insurance that we pay monthly. And this the president-elect used this national insurance issue to cause more divisions among Koreans and foreigners. Like he said that Chinese nationals, for example, use and benefit more than Koreans for the health insurance. And I think he even said like putting spoons on the tables prepared by the Koreans. That was his word, because he claimed that the national health insurance were mostly benefited Chinese, and say that 8 out of 10 covered by the reimbursement for national health insurance were like Chinese people, not Koreans. But it was actually a false claim, because the national health insurance, after that they say that actually foreigners paid more. Like the number of payment for the national health insurance were like more foreigners than Koreans, and the one who reimbursed it more were like Koreans. So this kind of issue caused more division in society, where like xenophobic is also one of the biggest issue here if you live like as a foreigner in Korea. And the last one is probably like immigration and multicultural family. Multicultural family refers to like the mixed on internationality marriage in Korea. So the government has been like formulating policy about how to integrate this kind of family into the Korean society and how they can be accepted in the society. For the president-elect, he doesn't really have like a policy, like how to formulate a clear policy on how to integrate it. And most of his policy was only incorporate the child, not the wife or the husband or the spouse, but he only focused on like strengthening education and care for the children, how to make the children like learn bilingual to integrate themselves in Korean society. So it's not about like the acceptance of the Korean people themselves to these people, but more like how these foreigners can be accepted, how they should do. And in my opinion, it's not really fair, because if we talk about like cultural assimilation, it should be from both sides. Like, of course, as a foreigner that we live in Korea for a long time, maybe we should learn the language and adapt to the culture. But if you live here as a spouse for someone, or like live here as a permanent resident, then of course there should be like mutual understanding and mutual respect for each other culture. And that's what's lacked in the multicultural policy from the government until now, in my opinion. So the immigration issue for students, of course, the most trading things to do is to extend our visa every year or every 6 months. And I feel that Korean government has been like very strict on this kind of visa, and they keep changing the rules as well for visa extension like per year. And the Conservative Party normatively are more strict to like immigration issues. I'm not sure if he has a specific immigration issue. I don't think he focuses on that. But normatively, Conservative Party will be more strict towards like immigration issue and the visa issuance for foreigner, especially like the residents here. I can give you example, like in 2019, if I want to extend my student visa for 6 months, I need to have around 2 million won in my bank deposit. But in 2020, it becomes 4 million won for 6-month visa extension and 9 million won for 1 year extension. So it's like doubled in the span of 1 year. That's also become concerns for like especially students who cannot earn money while you are living here. So I think these 3 issues should be like the main focus for foreigners who are living in Korea right now. Thank you, Miss Ella. I think I don't go over time.
No, you did really great. Actually, you have a couple of minutes if you'd like to add extra minutes for, experiencing the differences, you've experienced election in Indonesia, right?
Yes.
How is it different to what you experience in South Korea during election season? What's the hype?
I think it's almost the same. Miss Ninis has already said about it, like the social media war between people. And there was also a scandal just before the election where it was found out that this president-elect was having a secret chat group to slander the opponents. Things like that also happened here. And also the divide in the society, just like Professor Kyung has said, between men and women. Yeah, it's a bit more severe here than in Indonesia, I noticed. But for like the election process, I do think that the election process, when you cast your vote, it's more organized than in Indonesia.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. And they kept the line. Like if you go to the place and you have to cast your vote, you have to line up very organizedly. I don't think it happens in Indonesia.
We wait until the last minute.
Yes.
And then boom.
And because it's like pandemic era, so they are very strict on the protocol. And I think it's very applaudable to see that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. If I happen to see you in the street, maybe I will assume you're Korean already. And you speak in Korean, like, oh, she's Korean. Thank you so much for expressing your experiences and your thoughts about policies by the president-elect and the future of that will be held by this new government, the newly elected government. So, ladies and gentlemen, all the participants in this webinar, this is much awaited time for us to hear from you, your questions. May you have questions or queries or comments. Feel free to open your camera so we can see your beautiful faces and smiles, and open your mic if you have questions directly to the presenters that you'd like to hear back. So we're going to open the first batch. Any question from the floor, please? Question from I can see some of my colleagues, but I'm not gonna call them. It's called intimidating. So I'm just gonna let them do it voluntarily. Questions from the floor? Please.
You can type in questions in chat
Yes,
box.
you can also type, yes, exactly. You can also type your question in the chat box. If you have questions, just type it in and then we will address it in due course. But while we wait, maybe I have some questions though for Professor Keong. Reading from your blog as well as, you know, it's a social some sort of dynamics when we can see that political decision, like in election, people will express their political decision, their political attitude towards issues and towards leadership. Do you think that it is more and more young generation in Korea will be, how do you call it, less likely to support gender equality, and why did we come to that point today? Like, why is it so perceived to be so strongly negative to support gender equality?
Yeah, thank you, Ella. Very good question. And this is kind of a question that we have to ponder on for the next, I think, decades. To understand how gender plays in election politics. But it's very clear that gender actually has become really political issue now. And the gender has been always political issue, but it became a political sort of issue that we can see in election scene. One reason why the younger generation have different views is, I think, because their education is different from us, but their reality is does not represent their education. You know what I mean? So the young generation learned in schools and by books that gender equality is important, and then people should be treated equally and fairly. But the reality they experience is completely different. So so that means actually different thing to men and women. For women, it's like, oh, my life is terrible because I'm a woman. So women think this is a gender discrimination issue. But young men believe that, oh, we already achieved, the gender equality is supposed to be there. But it seems like the women and men are equal. They believe women and men equal. But the policy and politicians say there is a gender discrimination, and then women should be treated like, you know, the affirmative action and gender quota and things like that. So they think it is unfair to them because they believe that there should be gender equality already. So the young men believe that the start line is not fair for them. And women also think the reality is completely different from what they've learned. So there's a huge sort of gender gap in perception about what they've learned and the reality they experience.
So that is also bringing to the issues such as, well, maybe I'm just picking examples that I'm very familiar with because it's been highly publicized about, you know, privacy rights, and, you know, like we cannot imagine that there will be some some micro camera in public toilets, for example, and I can't imagine how to do that if I'm living in Korea. I mean, I will be haunted by these feelings and things that I should not be too worried about. But is it some sort of level of acceptance of, you know, trespassing the privacy in public domain becomes something that is some sort of a symptom as to how men and women have different perspectives in terms of gender equality in Korea?
Well, I think the perception that gender equality should be right, and then we as a society should be equal. There's no question about that. And particularly younger generation, as I said, they learned gender equality is a good value that we have to achieve, have to welcome in our society. but the whole reality is completely different, and the reality they experience is different. The camera kind of thing and
Yeah.
sex crime, it is a really serious thing. And then a lot of women, particularly younger women, because particularly their whole life is in virtual these days, right?
Yes.
Not just because of the COVID, but it used to be always like that. So a lot of young generation rely more and more on online communication and information, things like that. So if the digital space is not safe for women, think that digital space is really not safe and this is sexist, then it kind of expanded sort of their anxiety, because the digital world is where they actually live their life. But for men, they believe that this is only part of bad men who does that kind of thing. So a lot of men are actually, we might see some of the things, but this is not what we want. But it's just there. So they tend to be, they kind of happen to see some of them, but they don't agree that that is something that should be permitted or not punished and things like that.
Okay. Now I think some questions from the floor. Are you ready to ask questions? Yes, please. Miss Witri, can you just open your mic? Thank you. Please.
Right. Thank you, Miss Ella, Mbak Ella, and thank you, Prof. Shin. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Witri Alfianti. I'm currently working at Person University as a lecturer, and it's very interesting to listen to your presentation, and it really gives me, very critical information about South Korea, even though what is it? It's such a new issue for me, but some of my students undertake research about the South Korea, especially about the gender parity in South Korea, and therefore, when I listen to a presentation, it's just like, oh, this is very interesting to see the phenomenon about how young women express their voice, especially when they would like to express their political voices toward either criticizing or supporting the government. So my question is, how significant is the Me Too movement to influence the voice of young women in South Korea when they use social media during the election? Okay, thank you for your time, Professor. Thank you, Maela.
Thank you, Victory. Great question. This is exactly what I think the most important significant event in South Korea, the Me Too movement. I'm not sure how much you are familiar with the development of South Korea Me Too movement. I wrote actually two articles. I wrote 6 articles, but published in English in 2 articles. So I strongly suggest that you refer to those articles. The Me Too, I see the Korean Me Too is one of the probably the strongest movements in the world. Like we see a strong Me Too movement in US, United States, and Sweden, and South Korea. I think those 3 countries are where the Me Too movement was the strongest, but the development seems to be a little bit different. And Me Too movement in South Korea really inspired young women a lot. And then of course, there are different sort of versions of Me Too and different versions of different types of feminism in South Korea. But through Me Too movement, women sort of collectively realized their voices are completely ignored in society, and how prevalent the misogyny and the sex crimes in South Korea has been. So a lot of women started activism in this digital space, as well as in the area of sexual crimes and sexual harassment and violence. And they have loose sort of network, and they are connected through SNS, as just Annisa mentioned. So they have this kind of the strong base of perception about the misogyny and sex crimes in South Korea. And then that is the biggest issue for young generation to try to tackle with. And when the Lee Jae-myung recruited Park Ji-hyun, who has been active in this area, and a lot of young women actually welcomed her presence, and they sort of try to give their support to Lee Jae-myung because of her, not because of ruling party or Lee Jae-myung himself. So in that case, I see the awakening of women about misogyny and gender discrimination in South Korea through Me Too movement, and their sort of voice, their support for a certain candidate or a certain political issue is clearly very closely linked. And it is the one way how the women, particularly in young women, try to make their voice heard in the political world. So Me Too movement is really important, very significant event in my view.
Professor, we have a question from Moody. Moody, are you okay to open your mic so we can hear you? Is in the position where you can open your mic? If you are, can you please open your mic and deliver your question? If not, I will read it out for you. Moody. Where are you, Moody? Okay. What would be, it's okay. What would be your strategic suggestions for Indonesia, okay, which will hold a simultaneous election in 2024 based on your findings from gender parity perspective, so Indonesia could have better results on similar issue? Probably Mbak Ninis can also join me with this question. Probably we are not really, how do you say this? We are not really experiencing some sort of a hostile environment when it comes to gender equality in Indonesia. We have no issues so far, thank God. And then we are, I think we are on the right track. Yeah, many women's rights activists here attending this webinar will fully support my statement, suggesting that I think we are on the right track of achieving gender parity in Parliament. However, it's not as at the same pace as we would expect. But there's no hostile, some sort of approach to this idea of gender parity in Parliament. We have strong male feminist actors as well in the Parliament and outside Parliament, so that should not be an issue. But I think how to minimize division probably in the society, because election is always about, are you going with them or with us? You know, some sort of narratives that continue to live while long after the election is completed. So yes, thank you, Professor. If you can share your thoughts, as well as Mbak Ninis and Mbak Annisa could also jump into this question. Thank you.
Should I go first? Yeah. Other presenters, feel free to jump in to answer to this question. It's good that Indonesia doesn't experience this gender backlash now. I have to say that this kind of a gender issue, politicization of a gender issue, and the gender backlash, it is quite a recent phenomenon in Korea too, because Korea has progressive governments for at least 10 years, late 1998 to until 2007. And then Korea have conservative governments for a second term for another 10 years. Now, at the end of another progressive government, this is ironic. So, the Korea see this huge gender backlash. So it can come, it can come. And I hope it doesn't, but it can happen everywhere. As the previous presenter, Ninis said, the populism is on the rise everywhere. So the populism can take the aspect of gender backlash. So how to prevent it is now there are a lot of cases of gender backlash in other countries. So if we can get some lessons from them, one thing is not, when you talk about gender equality, it seems to be important to focus not only on women's status, but on women and men, not men and women, but women and men, and it is good for everybody. And it is actually good for everybody, but a lot of gender backlash is based on this wrong perception that feminism is only for female advantage or women's supremacy. It's impossible to have women's supremacy in any society, but this is kind of rhetoric and discourse to mobilize anti-feminist or anti-gender equality sentiment. So I think it's important to really focus all the time. Women's status is important to achieve gender equality, but it is for everybody. And to do this very strongly, it is always important to have more women and, if possible, men into your own group. So the coalition, network, this is kind of empowering tool, and as well as it is a way to influence your, increase your influence on society. But SNS is important, but when you have thousands of women who write about what is good about gender equality, then the SNS, hold this kind of opinion is getting tilted to gender equality. What South Korea has failed, particularly under this government or the previous government, is I think somebody, Ninis, I think, pointed it out this point, that there is systematic sort of movement to bring about the gender backlash, because they want to, the conservative, I think, try to link reverse discrimination against the men is the result of gender equality policy of the current government. You know how the logic goes. So gender equality issue is not gender equality issue, but this is a kind of the result, the outcome, the consequences of current government gender equality policy, so that we have to vote against the current government. So the whole logic is like this. So now you understand how it works. So you sort of kind of counteract to this kind of possible gender backlash.
Thank you so much for that insights. I think that's much awaited lessons that we need to learn, and maybe Mbak Ninis or Mbak Annisa would like to add to the points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Ella, answering Moody's question about gender parity in our upcoming election. Yeah, there is no gender backlash in Indonesia, thank God. But if we talk about increasing women representation in politics, it is still a long way, I think, because there is still some what we call it, like discrimination against women in politics. We're still facing marginalization, for example, that women are marginalized from political access, violence against women in election, physically, non-physically. Sometimes if there is a women candidate running for local election, running for public office, sometimes they are bullied by the netizen in the social media. And there is still also a stereotype, for example, that we as women cannot run from public office. We cannot serve as a mayor. We cannot serve as a governor, for example. And it is still a long way, because the political will from the political parties is the commitment of the political party is still, we still need to advocate the political party commitment to increase the women participation in election, because yes, they sometimes maybe feel that election is a competition, so women should compete with men, whatever the situation is, even though we already have affirmative action policy, but it is still cannot progress well in increasing women participation in election. So for the upcoming election, 2024 election, I think because there is no revision in our electoral law, we still have the same law with the previous election. So we need to raise awareness, breaking the silence. I think women personal testimonies from women politician, for example, Ibu Lena here as the ambassador, or other other women, for example, serve as a senator or as a speaker. They can give their testimonies to the people that show that we as a woman can also serve as in the public office. And back again, for our upcoming 2024 election, the political parties' commitment is very needed to increase the women participation in election, because now political parties, we have affirmative action policies in quota. Yeah, we have 30% quota in candidacy, but sometimes political party saw it as apa ya Mbak Ella, seruan moral ya. It's not an obligation. They just just fulfill the 30%. But if they want to put more women, 50%, 70%, it is okay. But they just come to the minimum quota. So yeah, even though there is no backlash situation, but it is still a long way, because we see that it is very important women sit in the executive or in the legislative policy or law. Like now we are advocating what is Mbak Ella, undang-undang anti kekerasan seksual, the law of anti-sexual harassment. We are now struggling for that to be passed on our parliament. That is very important. So and it can be goal if there is women in politics. I think that's my opinion.
Okay, thank you so much, Mbak Ninis. And lastly, maybe Mbak Annisa would like to add to that.
I think all points have been mentioned by Professor Shin and Mbak Ninis, but in terms of like women in politics, I think Indonesia is one step ahead of Korea, because there are more women participating in politics, and there's like no gender backlash either if women run for parliaments or for government, and even in social media, even if of course there will be some agreement and disagreement between people for certain issues. But yeah, I think in Korea, the kind of gender issue and women issue, even like violence against women, is that like more serious than what's happening in Indonesia. You mentioned about the hidden camera, and there are also lots of cases about femicides, murders, just because they had women, or like dating violence. There are many issues like that as well in Korea. But the same with Indonesian law, the perpetrators are not really persecuted about it. Like the jail terms is very low. It's the same with Indonesia, I think, for that kind of issue.
Okay. All right, I think as we are now approaching to the end of our webinar for today, I would like to recap some key insights from our sessions, three sessions, three excellent speakers, and this very fruitful discussion on what lessons can we learn from South Korea's latest election in 2022, as we are also approaching our own election in 2024 in a 2 years' time from here. One of the key tips probably, or insights from Professor Shin, is to always collaborate and work with partners, not only with among female but also with males. It's very important to emphasizing why we need to pursue this equality, gender equality. It's not only for women but also for men, and it's not only for one generation but for every generation, all generations. And I really like the way you said that imagine if we have thousands or millions of women writing about the importance of gender equality, then maybe we will have better outcomes. And the way that we are seeing this experience from South Korea is that we will learn as much as we can from various professions here. We are academics, we are also activists and students, and all parties that are interested in pursuing gender equality in Indonesia will also try our very best to try to explore ways to make this, efforts will be fruitful, resulting in fruitful results. Thank you so much for your deliberations in the experience of elections in Korea, and we look forward for future research collaboration or collaboration projects between Indonesia and South Korea. Please allow me to represent the Indonesian IR Association to express our deepest gratitude to all the speakers, Professor Shin. I know you're very, very busy, and Khoirunnisa, Agustyati, and Annisa, Pratamasari, and all the participants who made the time for this event. Really appreciate it, and apologize for all the mishaps and the limitations that we've experienced for this webinar. I look forward for the next meeting, maybe when we are having the opportunities. Thank you so much once again, and I'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mbak Ella, Prof. Kyung, Shin, Mbak Annisa. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you
very
for
much.
Be
everyone.
safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Bella.
Thank you. Bye. I will just stay here if you need more time. Yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone. And allow me to close the meeting. Have a lovely day, everyone. Bye.